learning space. So throughout this year, we will have different speakers joining us, and we thought that this will be one of the, because it's the start of our 2021 webinar series, that we will invite 3 internationally acclaimed scholars in these spaces to give us some kind of insights into the international trends and open up the space for us to share and engage in some of the critical discourses around the teaching and learning environment. Now, as you know, colleagues, that South Africa has faced many challenges, and while one of the biggest challenges has been the issue of connectivity and access to technology, we've also found that our universities were confronted with a teaching and learning environment in which overnight they had to adapt to remote blended learnings. And while Unisa is a distance learning university, we know that we have also experienced some of the challenges that have to rethink how we teach, how our students learn, and more specifically, how we assess. But critical to this is also the integration of technology, the integration of open pedagogies. And our speakers today will showcase some of these developments for us. At this time, I would like to invite Professor Mashila. He's the Executive Director for the Department of Tuition Support and Facilitation of Learning. He's also the project owner under which this project functions. Prof. Mashila, welcome. I know you currently committed to STLCEC as well. So we thank you for joining us, Prof. Mashila, and doing the introduction, welcome, as well as launching the academic series. So thank you, and over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Denzel, for the invitation and for the opportunity. I'd like to welcome and greet everyone. And yeah, is my slide visible? Denzel? I'm trying to share.
Yes, Prof, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Right. As Denzel has indicated, the pandemic caused about by the COVID-19 virus really created issues for higher education, where a lot of students had to not do what they are used to in terms of attending universities in a face-to-face contact mode, even in environments where it's open and distance learning. Our students, some of our students are used to being on campus. And in order for us to, as a higher education sector, to minimize these disruptions and to save the academic year, we resorted to using combinations of online and face-to-face contact, but mostly, especially during hard lockdowns, we just had no option but just to do online education. So overnight, academics were in the learning environment, moving their environment. And this, of course, created many challenges because universities had to contend with issues of the tools that are used in this environment, whether academics and even students are trained to do the work. Resources that were channeled into the online environments were sufficient or not. When it comes to assessment, issues of credibility, issues of linkage between the assessment and the pedagogy of the teaching, came up. So a number of issues came up about where institutions might not have had enough time to really pay attention to these matters and to deal with them comprehensively. So aspects of whether our students have got, and even staff, whether they've got access to technology and appropriate technology to connect with the institution, it became a real serious challenge. So online teaching and learning, colleagues, as you might know, requires different types of skills. from pedagogy, from the technical competences, how people communicate in collaborative. These kinds of competencies, not every one of us do have them, unfortunately. And so, so as technology advanced during the pandemic, the style and the scope of teaching and learning also had to change. So academic, driven by technology, had to rethink issues of content and curriculum design and that we are using. Now, added to the above were the questions of institutional readiness to provide academics with tools in this changing environment. So with the skills to technology mediated learning, students require a new set of skills as well. So students need to have the competency to navigate the learning environment, to access and manage knowledge, and to manage their own learning autonomy by managing their individual learning processes. Right, in a presentation made by Tony Bates, he identifies a number of skills that students need in the 21st century, and those include digital learning skills, how to navigate the whole area of knowledge management, to work and to learn independently, the ethics around this environment, teamwork and flexibility and thinking skills. So, so when we at Unisa worked through these issues and a myriad of other issues, we developed our own academic development frameworks as a tool to help us think through how and where we must do interventions, not only to target students, but also to target staff, because we realize that we are coming into this exercise not from the same playing field, and so we need to be able to help each other to get to the ultimate goal. So from the Unisa development framework, academic development encompasses integrated, student-centered, targeted institutional initiatives that are aimed at enhancing the capacity of both staff, whether those staff are teaching, that is academics, or they are in the support field, and students, to optimize student success within an ordained environment. These initiatives are undergirded by the principles of blended learning, infused support, collaborative development of the curriculum, intervening with care, complexity in knowledge production, and learning organization approach to teaching and learning. So if we were to unpack this project now that we are involved with, the Academic Development Open Virtual Hub, the key focus there is on academic development. So the focus of the this Academic Development Open Virtual Hub program will be academic development, as I've said, of both staff and students in an open and virtual technology-mediated learning space. This will include open courses, open webinars, open education resources, and the establishment of a community of practice who can be able to help sustain and support this environment. And so, as part of this project and this process, we have a innovation in teaching and learning seminar series, so that we can bring together experts in this field. We could bring together leading scholars in this field, from which we can start developing our capacities, developing our understandings of this terrain, and in order for us to be able to navigate this space properly. So today we launched Innovation in Teaching and Learning series. And the aim of the series is really to broaden our insights to the global trends in teaching and learning. And we have invited 3 internationally acclaimed speakers who will help us with this. We've got Professor Marcus Specht, Dr. Andrea dos Santos, and Dr. Yeshe Moore to help start this process of this seminar series. So we really are looking forward to engagement in the teaching and learning series, but in particular to today's series that will continue even on the 17th. And so we're really excited with this. We really want to welcome our keynote speakers, to thank them for the time that they will spend with us and share their expertise with us. We really appreciate your help and your support. But we really look forward to this series in creating a new space for us to engage the international trends and the critical issues that confront us as South Africa, and in particular that confront us as Unisa, as the dedicated open and distance e-learning institution. I'd like to also welcome all the participants who are in this seminar, and I trust that we will be able to have fruitful engagements and provide valuable perspectives that we all need. So I really like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mashila, for that. Welcome, as well as launching the Academic Development Open Virtual Hub series for us today. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start getting into the speakers, let me quickly welcome all those that have also joined us. As Prof echoed. We've got guests from Unisa, plus we've got guests from outside Unisa, and plus we have a few international people as well. So thank you very much for joining us. I know that you are all looking very much forward to engaging with our keynote speakers and the high profile that they bring to this particular event as well. At this time, I also want to quickly alert you that today is the first day of the Innovation in Teaching and Learning series, and this particular day looks at the internationalization, bringing 3 international speakers to Unisa, to the South African context, so that we can engage with them. On Wednesday, that's the 17th, we will then have a second session with South Africans to contextualize some of these developments and look at how can we then bring in some of these international benchmarks to the South African context based on this, on our own contextual factors that defines and redefines what we mean as teaching and learning in an higher education in South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the 3 speakers today, I know each one of them, and also grateful that at a very short notice that they were able to come on board. And I know that much of it's their passion for what they are doing, but also for the South African context, the developing context as well. We have 3 speakers today, and the 3 speakers that we have, Professor Marcus Specht, who will be talking on mobile and seamless learning. Dr. Andrea Marat dos Santos, she will be talking of open pedagogies for a digital era. And later on, we'll have Dr. Yeshe Moore, who will be talking on hybrid education when learning defies boundaries and challenges conventions. I've had the opportunity of engaging with all these colleagues personally, and I can tell you that we're in for a really good day today, and some of the critical debates and discourses, as well as their publications and research in this field, have actually positioned them as leading scholars in this field. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to our first speaker for today. So some protocol, as you notice that all your mics are mute. So the easiest way for you to actually engage with us is to please post your comments on the comments tab as the speakers are going on, and then we'll filter some of those comments towards the end of the session at each speaker. Our first speaker today, it gives me much pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Marcus Specht, who is the Professor of Digital Education at the Technical University of Delft and the Director of the Leiden Delft Erasmus Center for Education and Learning. He received his diploma in psychology in 1995 and attestation from the University of Trier in 1998 on adaptive information technology. From 2001, Professor Specht, he headed the Department Mobile Knowledge at the Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Information Technology. And from 2005 to 2018, he was Professor for Learning Technologies at the Open University Netherlands and the head of the Learning Innovation Lab. His research focuses on the mobile and contextualized learning technologies and social and immersive media for learning. Professor Specht is also an Apple Distinguished Educator and was president from 2013 to 2015 of the International Association of Mobile Learning. I actually a few years back. I was also lucky to spend some time with Marcus in Shanghai Open University, and he was one of the keynote speakers, one of the international speakers at Shanghai Open University, speaking about ubiquitous learning, and his knowledge on technology integration was really impressive, and he created a much buzz around Shanghai Open University in terms of his knowledge on mobile learning, ubiquitous learning anyway. So thank you very much, Marcus, for joining us today, and let me say welcome to Unisa, Marcus, once again. It's a pity that you're not physically here, but we still can do what we need to do, and maybe in the future we can physically get all of you back onto the space as well. So thank you, Marcus, very much, and I hand over the platform to you. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Denzel, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to speak today. I just share my slides and hope you all can see them. To get a bit of interactivity, let's just kick off with a little experiment, see how far the network can go. May I ask you all to shortly switch your camera on, so that it's for me, I get a bit of idea for who is there. Let's experiment. Great. Yeah. This looks marvelous. Yeah, my kind of virtual classroom is filling up here. Great. More and more people coming in. Perfect. I will probably make a screenshot of that. Yeshay, hey, Denzel. Great. We have also very young guests. That's great. Yeah, you know, I recently applied for some funding, and we looked into self-regulation. And I think most of you know that experience of talking to an empty classroom. By the way, thank you all for shortly switching on the camera. So we probably make this more efficient now and go back to blind mode. But having this feedback gives you the idea of being in a real space, talking to people. That is very important for our idea of and getting feedback and regulate our behavior. So you can all see my slides. Probably we reduce the interactivity to the chat. You can give me a short yes or thumbs up or post things. Okay, let's get started. My name is Marcus Specht. I think Denzel highlighted very nicely a bit of my career. So I'm a bit of interdisciplinary guy. So I came from cognitive psychology, but worked in software engineering. And the last 2.5 years, I had the luck to join and head up the Center for Education and Learning for 3 Dutch universities, the Technical University of Delft, the University of Leiden, and the Rotterdam Erasmus University. And this is a joint center for the 3 universities. I also work with different disciplines here in this context, with engineers, but also with more social science, humanities. So different backgrounds, and I really enjoy that interdisciplinary approach. Furthermore, I'm since 2020 heading up there's an association for the 4 technical universities, and they also do a lot of research in engineering education. So that's about the context. You find both centers online if you want to learn more about the activities. But I have some very interesting news for you. Of course, also the Netherlands has been hit hard with COVID. So there has been a dramatic response actually in the news last week. That's the newspaper from last week, you see, Saturday. The ministry decided we go full mobile. So mobiles will be the technology, mobile number one, to be used for all teaching and learning on all levels, from primary school to higher education. Of course, this is a dramatic step, and today I'm happy to show you about some of the backgrounds and the developments that led to that decision. First of all, why? Why has that happened? And what were the main reasons for that decision? Very simple. Everybody, I don't know, in the Netherlands, that's definitely the case. I think nearly everybody has a mobile smartphone nowadays. It's affordable. You can get it for little money. All variations are out there, from open hardware to very consolidated, long-standing systems. So everybody has access to this technology. Second, mobiles are the number one in, for sure, listening, podcasts, music. Everybody uses that. Watching. If you look to the younger generation, especially, and secondary class, it's the number one device for watching. YouTube, all kinds of podcasts, all kinds of video. So everything watching, mobiles are number one. And even more if you look into usage habits on reading. So with all important activities for learning, listening, watching, reading, mobiles are the number one device. That made the decision even easier. Furthermore, it was considered, and we did the last 15 years long-standing research on this. Of course, it's the number one device to collect photos and personal memories, as also audio recordings, or collect points of interest, locations where you have been, and which are important. Even more on top of that, what is the number one platform in gaming today? Of course, it's mobiles, it's smartphones, it's tablets. This is the number one device for social media, for dating, you name it, it's the number one device. And furthermore, of course, as these mobile devices, smartphones, have all kinds of sensors, high resolution cameras and depth sensors, it's also, unbelievably, the number one device for augmented reality. And this is a future leading technology. So this was one consideration that the ministry took into account, because, of course, the technology to be used also has to be future-proof. And last but not least, what we all experienced in the pandemic, of course, what were the number one use cases for all of us? Video conferencing, email, and every of these devices, or nearly everyone, has a camera built in. You can do video conferencing. There's pre-installed software solutions for that. And let me point that out. We didn't even count in the number one application, that is messaging. But of course, that's integrated. So messaging, there has been recent studies from big online sites, especially for students, for learning content, which showed that the #1 service that students go to is mobile messaging. So how could the minister choose for something different than mobile devices? I couldn't count any or find any service where mobiles are not #1. So this made the decision easy. But also what made the decision easy when the pandemic hit was that the last 15, nearly 20 years, we had different stages of development. So we did experimentation. There's long-standing work, especially using mobiles in excursions, in mobile video conferencing, in collaboration, but also in educational games. So there's a lot of research showing the effectiveness of this approach. And also we did, in the years after that, a lot of work on collaboration, group work, but also lecturing with mobile devices. So that basically led to the decision that we now have a nationwide rollout. All the devices are available instantly. It's a cheap solution. We have no usability problems, and it's simply working. This led to even more consequences. You see here an overview, but in the context of preparing this shift, we restructured the whole curriculum in all kind of classes and all kind of subjects to use mobile technologies. And you will not believe it, but here I give you only some examples. The mathematics curriculum on all levels has been restructured. And we have simple side effects, as no one needs to additionally buy a calculator anymore. So we all have a software calculator very cheaply available on the smartphones. We have software for geometry, for algebra exercises dedicated to complete the online lecture for exercising at home. And you won't believe it, the engagement of students in mathematics has risen significantly, as we have a lot of interesting math games that put in competitive elements into this. So we have seen a dramatic rise in interest in mathematics. Furthermore, language. You won't believe it, but the use of audiobooks has first led in the last year to the effect that students get excited again about the core literature we're reading, and they read it together in social reading apps. And furthermore, we have integrated technologies into our tablet readers that can be simply plugged onto standard tablets, which enable a reading coach. So we can track the reading by eye tracking and give instant feedback to students on their reading speed, coach them on understanding problems, and the educators can get learning analytics of these activities. So mathematics, language, core competences for the future, digital skills, of course, it's embedded in these technologies, programming, data analysis, collaboration, you have built it in. You don't need to do anything. There are masses of applications for learning programming on smart devices, on mobile devices. And not to forget about that, most of us had problems of like, do we still use our handwriting? More and more kids switch over to keyboards. But with this solution, we basically came back to using pens, doing handwriting, doing drawing, which is an extreme advantage for developing also physical skills for younger kids. And not to forget about, and we built this on recent research from Switzerland, you can easily diagnose specific problems in writing by analyzing the tracking data from the pens. Furthermore, of course, music, it's built in to the system. and photo class. So we got new possibilities by these devices that have not yet been explored all over the place. But this is just to give you an example what the impact of this shift actually was also on the education system. And there's one other big advantage I would like to share with you. So this is a typical school day. At the school, we introduced the solution. And as one consequence, we also could move to a complete agile lecture plan. That means the students can choose themselves the topics of their own projects and define their own goals and work flexibly with these mobile tools to work on their projects. And we structured that into really working more with coaches as teachers. For example, this is an example from secondary school, but we implemented it also in higher education. So this is a typical example of how the application of agile methods in school looks for us. Of course, we take into account knowledge building on all levels, from cognitive to motivational, behavior, and contextual level. But it's also the social context that is brought much more in, because most of the social context nowadays of our kids and students take place online. So we can use all this input and bring these students together in projects they work on and build from their home. All right, so this has been the developments in the Netherlands. I can just ask you to please join the movement, and I will give you some ideas of the flexibility we also have seen in using this approach. So please all join that movement if you want to have some scientific evidence and underpinning of this. This has been a book from 2015, finalizing or also looking into some of the research that is happening there, following the approach from Singapore on the definition of seamless learning. So seamless learning in that sense of like bridging different seams or gaps, the seam between formal and informal learning, that is solved by mobiles. Personalized and social learning, mobile devices are the most social tool we have available nowadays. You can use it across time, across location, and in different applications contexts. And you can even combine multiple devices. And considering the development of augmented reality, you can bridge physical and digital worlds. Just to give you one example of that, that we worked on, I think about 10 years ago as a research prototype, but we used a lot of mobile technologies in training architecture students. And the case was that these students simply have to take snapshots of buildings wandering around in the city and connecting this. No, unfortunately, there's no open version of the book coming to the question, but you can of course find in the libraries, you find most of related or similar articles of the authors if you have the table of contents, which is available online. And so the architecture students had to take as a task, they had to do analysis of existing buildings, and they had to take photos, they had to take measurements of the buildings, either to describe the facade, to describe the relations, the structural concept, and so on. And so this bridging of physical and digital worlds, therefore also mobiles are the #1 tool to do that. Okay, let me show you some of the flexibility of this approach. Of course, You can come from different pedagogies. I mean, our experience was that teachers come from different backgrounds. They use different approaches for teaching. So an approach we've chosen must be flexible. So one flexibility is pedagogy. This is a publication already from 2004 we built on. So dependent if you do programmed instruction and follow a kind of behaviorist approach and want to drill exercises and use that, or if you come from a complete constructivistic approach, or you want to focus more on situated or collaborative learning, for all you find examples in the literature and also in our approach how to implement this with mobiles. I give you some examples. For one thing we found a lot in mathematics, for example, that go back to paradigms as programmed instruction. You can very easily, and there's a lot of systems out there on adaptive feedback in math exercises, where you very easily can use generative systems, so systems that by random create new exercises, go to algebra, go to geometry, go to even complexer fields as linear algebra in higher education. You can use these systems to scale up your tasks, your exercises, adapt them to the students and present them and let the students grow with this. Beside that, of course, you can also, as you see on the right side, contextualize these learning activities. So connect them to the physical space available for the students. Another example, which more in depth even explores that approach, what we've seen in the pandemic is that, of course, people want to go outside, they go hiking, they go wandering as far as this is possible. So we use the physical activity where they can individually explore the city, have a walk, and by that activity do either mobile blogging, collect content, collect photos, or just listen to podcasts we have produced that guide you through a city. That all is possible. Of course, it's distributed, it's decentralized, so we don't need to have a group of people, but everybody is able to do that individually. A last approach, and there's a lot of research, so well in the book, then on other publications on the use of mobile technologies for excursions or field trips. We applied that in different kind of fields from really primary school up to higher education. You can use the mobile device on all parts of the activity, from preparing an excursion, defining the tasks, collecting data in the field trip, as also video conferencing in the field and out of the field with a mobile device. It's ideal. You don't have to do anything. You can just use it out of the box. These were some examples for how you can implement different learning paradigms or your ideas about this learning paradigm with mobile technologies. Another approach is, of course, your task design can vary. What kind of tasks are you using? This is an example from even older. It's from 2002, where we used basically different task structures as collaboration means for students. They were also located in the city center or in the city or in the area where the excursion takes place. And you can use the tasks as a structure for collaboration. And this was this project about. A second one where we supported more individual excursion. This is very similar to the example about architecture I explained before. This is an online or a mobile tour for Florence. We developed at the Open University as a prototype, which basically gave you the chance to freely explore Florence in Italy but at the same time also look at tasks and get specific tasks for your current location in the city. And to these tasks, record annotations, record photos you take on the mobile device. It brought all together on your mobile smartphone. But it's not only individual, but let's say you are more in complex collaboration scenarios. I just show you some examples of how role-driven design can be implemented. This was from a project also in an excursion context. You can see on the left side, at that time we still were using the classroom, but it would be easily possible also to implement all the roles on the left side distributed from home. But you had basically a task manager person which structured tasks. You had person that do desktop research on the lower side. So let's say the task would be, it's a biology class and we have to find the different plants growing in a certain area. So these people on the left side can work from home. They can do desktop research, find out about the plants in online archives and so on. The task manager defines these tasks. We have colleagues on the left side to support the collaboration as the teacher, the director of the whole field trip, but also the video conferencing manager and the messaging person that monitors and moderates the chat. And on the right side, we have distributed people in an excursion, which basically either used to approach experts. So one person could take an interview online and that can be live streamed or is live streamed to all the participants, either at home or in the field. Or you could ask, for example, the data gatherer on the lower right side to collect specific data. So in that project, we worked out a complete role model and used these roles for designing different activities and collaborations between these roles. And these, of course, now can easily be implemented using mobile devices, so well at home as also in the field, and setting up these collaboration tasks. This is an example of 10 years later, where we we're looking into inquiry-based learning and the use of these roles in inquiry-based learning. One example I also implemented now in my lecture with higher education students or university students. For example, did you have a healthy breakfast this morning? So I asked, that was the main question, and to become aware of what does it mean to have a healthy breakfast. So they all gonna post a photo this Wednesday on their breakfast, and we will just reflect in the class on what they did. And on the right lower side, you see a dashboard we developed in that context, which basically monitors and looks into, did people submit something? Did they collect data? So we looked at the different phases of the inquiry cycle and the different activities of students, which also should help the students to basically reflect on their own activities. So, I think this is in Dutch, but you get a little impression of how the tools work in context. This is an excursion in Maastricht, in the very south of the Netherlands. The weather is typical, I would say. No, not always.
In de pilot cultuurhistorisch veldwerk met AR-Learn.
And the scenario here we have so-called lifelong learning students, people that really want to engage in learning activities also later in their professional life. And in this case, you have to walk through the city.
In dit geval voeren de studenten hun opdrachten uit in het historisch centrum van Maastricht.
In the historical center of Maastricht, and they use the mobile device basically to find the location and record reflections. They use it as a simple online audio recorder.
We hebben eLearn in eerste instantie ontwikkeld om studenten op een intensievere manier.
This is the back end basically. So I think you get an idea. This is the way how you start a tour. You just scan a barcode and you're ready to go.
Zie je, hebben we een opening.
By the way, are all still alive? Please give me a little sign in the chat. Any questions? Okay, I come to augmented reality in a minute. All good at Denzel's place, still there, hooray, very good. We are here, excellent, Derek, thank you. Is there free data for students? Paul, can you say something about what you mean with free data for students? Like free data to do simulations or what? Okay, data on cell phones. Yeah, of course. I mean, the problem on you mean a data connection. Of course, in a small country, it's as the Netherlands, it's not that problem anymore. You have wireless hotspots nearly everywhere, so that problem actually also was solved. So we don't need to think about it. And the competition on data plans is extremely high. So basically all the students already had a data flat rate in place. We didn't need to take care of that. And just to mention that beside that, a very interesting side effect, but that also has shown up earlier in research, is that actually the mobile device helps a lot to get technology out of the way. So for the rare occasions where people really met face to face, of course, due to the pandemic restrictions, technology was gone away completely and they interacted. And this helped also a lot to shape a new vision of using technology in education. Okay, Vanessa was wondering, with the push for social emotional learning in schools, this would also flow over to higher education, and how would this be managed virtually? Oops. Social emotional learning in schools, of course, we have, I mean, I don't know if I get your question correctly, but what we have seen, especially with the arts and the STEAM approaches in schools, like embedding more artistic expression and also this freedom. And we did this so well in primary, secondary, and higher education. This led to a lot of more involvement and engagement and motivational enhancement, if you want to say so, or more motivation to learn and look into the learning materials. Probably you can detail your question a bit more. Great, it looks that there are some more activities, but let's go on. Look into process-driven design. Another flexibility. So you might have different educational processes you want to look into, how you implement that, how your detailed learning design looks. Mobiles give you the flexibility. This is in a case where we used a mobile app basically for implementing training in higher education in the medical centers. And in these medical centers, we have, for example, first responder teams. I'm now working on a training using these technologies for intensive care units. So their people have to develop certain skills which are critical to patient safety. In this case, it was a handover scenario, so how to hand over patients. But you also have it now, for example, for intensive care units. There, people have to be trained to very early identify critical symptoms of patients, which is essential. And we trained these skills with mobile tools. So you had very embedded, realistic scenarios where you, for example, there happens an emergency. So you really learned by training, following these scenarios, and you can easily implement these scenarios just with a mobile game tool we have developed. But in that sense, we were able not only to develop games for single players or multiplayers, but you also had a lot of flexibility for collecting data and embedding learning in authentic situations. This is a language game we developed for primary school kids. Basically, you get a scenario like a friend comes to visit, you have to prepare pancakes. Luckily, the supermarket was the last thing that was still open where kids could go, and they could scan the products in the supermarket and learn the words or the expressions of the names of the products in 3 languages, as we have a lot of border regions also in the Netherlands, like with German, France. You could learn the names of the products in 3 languages by scanning the products. And this, of course, led to several effects. Kids were really motivated to use these tools. Secondly, you got an authentic embedding, a situational embedding of the learning situation, and you had a scenario which you could, of course, easily vary and give other tasks for mobile activities in context. So we also applied this in higher education, the same principle for energy reduction at the workplace and at home. We also applied it in this critical situation where you have a hosted simulation. We did this for United Nations. And the importance of this approach was that we really could simulate the steps of such a critical intervention in time. This is another example of a more collaborative scenario. So this is a schematic setup of the harbor in Rotterdam. And we basically had to train peoples on the different phases from the hinterland transportation to the vessels to become more aware of what is happening in the rest of the harbor. Because this, of course, costs a lot of money, and here you can also save a lot of money. So we basically did a decision training game on mobile devices, where we did a kind of simulation where people got simulated phone calls, simulated tasks, to learn in that game about actually the importance of the other stakeholders for their own decisions. So this is a bit the logic flow. You have different roles, like from sales to the vessel manager. You introduce the group, you have individual activities, but you also have to take personal decisions. And the main learning objective was just to become aware of the importance of this individual informations and decisions to the other part and to your part. So last but not least, I mentioned at the beginning that mobile devices are the #1 devices for collecting data and doing reflection on that data. So what kind of data can you collect with mobile devices? We implemented and used in the past in projects video recordings, photos, audio recordings. You can even type in and calculate numeric values. We did that, for example, in projects on biology, where you had to measure water pH value or water temperature. You don't need a fancy connector. You can just measure with your sensor and type it into your smart device, but you instantly connect it. You can deploy and use multiple choice questions or all types of assessment issues. You can scan barcodes to trigger activities or measure certain activities. So there's a huge variety of possibilities to collect data with these devices. And of course, you can use this in different directions. This is a publication that's freely accessible, where we analyze different learning scenarios and different applications on the influence of learner agency. So we basically found that you have a lot of varieties from direct instruction to peer-to-peer communication, which all can support and strengthen different phases of a learner agency model, from goal setting, content access, learning activities, strategies, reflection on your activities, and monitoring your own progress in a kind of self-regulation cycle. So I think this gives you, if you look at that paper, you find a lot of evidence collected on which and what kind of learning activities could be helpful for your purposes. A last example, but this is, I think, a very good example on how powerful actually these mobile notifications are. I think all of you have or might have a lot of mobile notifications. You see on the device type, this is already a bit older, but nevertheless, what we simply did is we sent a short message to students after their school day. On the one hand, to rate their school day, but also give us an indication of what is the most important thing you learned today. And we found immediate effects due to this reflection on the personal engagement and on the motivation of the students for specific topics. So just a single moment of injecting reflection in your overarching learning idea and design can have a strong impact. So now on the question of augmented reality, this of course we only started to implement. We don't use it. We used some examples now in higher education. But these are scenarios where you can, in this case, you need a big screen at home, but you can also do it with a smart device. The important component is the sensor technology of having a camera available. And in that case of the presentation trainer, you could train presentations at home. By just standing in front of your device, your camera is scanning your body behavior, your voice, and it gives you instant feedback on if you, for example, cross your arms, like what I'm doing now, and says, oh, probably you should not cross your arms. That gives like cutting out signal, or it gives a different signal to your participants and to your listeners. So you probably should use like your arms in that way or other ways. It said, talk slower, make breaks. All this kind of instant feedback was embedded on a system using the sensors of a mobile technology. I skipped the video demo for now. We can come back to that if we're interested. And we brought this a bit further with the mobile devices that are currently available, that are probably not, or that for sure not are everyday use, but a lot of the augmented reality we could also simply implement with smartphones and tablet devices. In this case, this was a project where we really tried out how far we can go with augmented reality. And we used it for training in medical care. We used it for training in maintenance. And I show you a short video on how this can look.
Okay, unscrew this bolt here. Yes, like this. And then take it out, pull it like this. Wonderful. Okay, now lift the rotor like this and take it off the shaft. Then hold the support and remove the rotor. Exactly. Now flip the rotor and put it back on the shaft. Now take the spirit lever here and put it on top, like this, horizontally. Then check if the bubble is in the middle here. Perfect. Now take the spirit lever and turn it and put it on like this. Yes. Now check again the bubble in the middle here. If it's perfect. Okay, take the scissors here. Then cut the threads here and here. Yes. Yes, and here. Now hold the thread console unit like this, and then pull the threads out. Go threads. Yes.
Okay, so you get the idea. In this case, this was really a remote coaching scenario. So you can imagine that there are a lot of possible patterns of how you can use augmented reality. In the video we just have seen, augmented reality was used as a remote communication issue or media. Meaning that the voice of the coach you heard, the coach was also real-time connected via a camera to the person doing the maintenance job and could just embed virtual hands to give guidance to the learner. And in this paper that is also available open access, you find 18 design patterns of how augmented reality has been used just to highlight two of the last examples, of course, augmented paths. This is a typical embedding in the visual field where you give indication and guidance for users. And we use these in different ways. For example, in the engineering domain, where we guide the visual attendance of the learners to certain parts of a virtual reality component of our augmented reality object. The augmented mirror design patterns you just have seen in the presentation trainer. So basically you stand in front of a display. The display has some sensors. It can record and track your movements. A similar approach we do now with handwriting recognition. I mentioned that at the beginning. So we did a handwriting trainer for younger kids, which basically enables us to track all the movements and the angle of the pen and the pressure of the applied to the pen when writing, and analyze these data points and give real-time feedback to the students, either to the path they're drawing or to the speed in which they're drawing, or also to the pressure, which is a very good indicator for the body tense they are applying and how relaxed they are writing. So you have a lot of possibilities, and I would like to highlight that augmented reality in this sense is not only like the full embedded HMD display, but one recent project we just started this year is using holograms in education at Delft University of Technology. And we basically want to use holographic recordings of either objects, but also of lectures to give a real-time immersion and embedding. And this could mean that probably the next time I want to give a talk to you, you can, if you have a kind of mobile device at home, just see me as a hologram in your room. And believe me, this technology is not out there for the next 20 years. This technology is affordable. You just need a recording studio, which you also need for good video, and you can use a mobile device to play back the holographic information. So this is not something that is very fancy or very advanced, although we hope that we find interesting effects in using holographic information. So to conclude, I hope I convinced you that decision of the Dutch government was appropriate, and I hope you join in the movement, and we all will use mobile devices in the future for our successful learning journeys on all levels. Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Marcus. I think that was indeed fascinating. But I think more especially, Marcus, that what you've said with mobile learning resonates a lot with the South African and the broader African context, if I may say that as well, in terms of access, which is one of our biggest issues, and it's posed a critical challenge in the last last year, specifically with the COVID crisis. But Marcus, also thank you for debunking the myth that mobile learning is only situated in developing contexts. I think that is quite interesting, because we have this kind of idea that it's the developing context that features, where mobile learning features a lot. And to see this in your context is quite fascinating. I mean, that actually opens up a whole new space for us to engage on, beyond the idea that it's just a developing context that can benefit from mobile learning. But also in terms of how mobile learning forces us to rethink curriculum design, mobile learning pedagogies, and also the way you've actually spoke about. I think it resonates much with us at Unisa about bridging the distance gap between our students and institution. And I think that is where a lot of our colleagues will find what you are saying quite interesting and fascinating. I've also seen that you've integrated a lot of the QR codes, and this has been something that we've been trying to integrate at Unisa as well for some time. It'll be good to see how we can actually integrate that more strategically in terms of where our institution is. So colleagues, okay, so let's, while Richard opens up the space for us, colleagues, what we're going to do is a Q&A session with Marcus. I know you've got some interesting questions that you posed. I'm going to ask Richard to allow you to unmute your mic. So what we can do at the moment is just to have a more engaging discussion, is just raise your hands, colleagues, and then we can open up the space for you to post your questions. I see Richard has now given you the opportunity to unmute yourself. So if you can just raise your hands, and then you can offer your questions. Okay, so we have anybody?
Probably while you think of questions, just as a disclosure also, of course, I'm not an official representative of any kind of Dutch government organization or their like. I'm a researcher fascinated about that field, so you have to contextualize my newspaper fakes in that context. But I think that was clear to most of you. But yeah, and one remark about what Denzel said, of course, the interesting effect that happened. I remember a lot of discussion on mobile learning being about the distance you have to travel and the accessibility. But here we also seen that the pandemic reshaped thinking of people about the importance and accessibility of these platforms. Yeah.
Thanks, Marcus. I see we've got Vanessa. Vanessa, you've got a question?
Yes, thank you very, very much for your presentation. I must tell you, I almost feel like a kid in a candy shop when I see what the possibilities really are if you're willing to think out of the box. So Denzel, if you will permit me, I've got two questions, and Marcus, if that's okay. I'm not sure how many other people have questions, but I'll try and make it quick. I just wanted to contextualize my question on social-emotional learning I work a lot with schools, and we working. I work within social emotional frameworks in order to assist with some behavioral issues that are taking place at school, and various activities that we can do to assist with emotional regulation, interpersonal skills, and the like. So when I was busy watching your presentation, I just thought it would be so awesome if higher education, I'm not sure to what extent other universities do this, but every university has got a student center. And I was just wondering to what extent we couldn't develop something virtually to help students as well, because part of social emotional learning is also how to make wise decisions. So that was actually my question. I was just thinking it would be awesome if we could develop apps and things like that that can actually assist with the academic support that we provide for students. And then I just wanted to also say that I think with mobile devices, and I mean, our students at the moment use mobile devices to write exams and everything like that. So I'm really excited about the different options that you presented. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, absolutely. Academic and emotional support. I just want to highlight one example. As most of you know, like mobile messaging is one of the, if not the most popular service on mobile devices. So what we do on that, and also did on that, we started the project also beginning this year on developing so-called intelligent conversational agents. You can also call them chatbot. That depends on your interpretation and on how much intelligence or artificial intelligence you put in there. But especially for training or supporting students and educators in online study skills, as goal setting, as monitoring of their goals, as motivational issues. Basically our hope, and this is in the experimentational phase, but there's also some evidence that we can support students via these chatbots directly in their daily struggle, we have to say nowadays, to continue their study successfully. And we're pretty optimistic on that part, and there is evidence so well for emotional support as also metacognitive support for students working with conversational interfaces and agents. I hope that answers a bit of your question, but that is one approach we're taking currently.
Thanks, Marcus. I see while the colleagues are getting ready for further questions, Anna-Marie Bates posed a good question. At Unisa, we are now moving away from our traditional learning management system, which is Sakai-based, to a Moodle-based platform. And she posed a question of whether she hopes that the new platform will make provision for this type of augmented reality approaches. But just a quick one to follow up on that, Marcus. What is there a specific learning management platform that you all are using in the institution?
Very good question. As I'm working with 3 universities, we basically have 2 bigger learning management systems in place. One is Brightspace, the other one is Canvas. Both have their facilities, but and possibilities and strengths and weaknesses. I cannot tell you which is the better or worse one of these. What we basically mostly do there is to either develop specific plugins or components you can embed in this backbone. Because of course, one issue you always run into, even if all the services are available, you need to, of course, develop a safe haven in that sense, and also because of course GDPR is important, very important for us. Keeping the student data safe is important for us, and then also using services that are secured only to be accessed by personal staff and students. This is very important to us. So of course, you need this backbone and the integration with this backbone to ensure this properly. Yeah, these are the two platforms we use in daily life, and we think they offer a lot of possibilities for extensions.
Thanks, Marcus. I think that's a good point. Is that and also the idea of using exploring both Canvas and the Bright Start. We've got two questions. Let me open up the floor first for Lydia.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question regards the algorithms that work behind the, for example, body language, how inclusive those algorithms are across diverse cultural settings, and how do you achieve that inclusivity?
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for that question. Basically, how we achieve that is that it's a rule-based system, and it's not a data-driven system in first instance. So how did we come to the kind of rule set that governs, or that we use to construct the feedback algorithm for the presentation trainer? That is based on interviews we did with coaches that give presentation trainings. And out of that, we constructed different do's and don'ts for different phases of a presentation, these kind of issues. And you might say that there could be some biases, but we didn't have any of that. We used it for people, different age, different body sizes, different body shapes, also with different voice pitches. So it's basically a rule-based system. It's not an only data-driven approach where you get the typical biases based on the data set you use to train your neural network, but we built on the core of a rule-based approach. And I hope that answers the question. But of course, if we roll it out in really different settings, we would need to check that again.
Thanks, Marcus. Okay, we've got one question here by Professor Benessa Steenkamp. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Very fantastic talk, nice technology. I am from the University of Pretoria, the Deputy Dean of Teaching and Learning in the faculty, and actually we're looking at clinical training alternatives, and this is something that really could offer this. I would like to ask, and I'm sorry if I missed it, I had a bit of technical difficulties when the questions and answers started, so I had to re-log on. The cost implications, you said it was easy, it's not really rocket science to have it, not fancy advanced, and you can use your mobile device. However, there must be costs involved in this whole thing. What are we looking at the costs to get this set up and to get this done? This augmented reality, and then also how data intensive are these programs? That's another thing that is of concern. It's actually where people are resource strapped, that we need to know that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interesting question. I would like to give you a two-split answer that also goes more on a lo-fi and a hi-fi possibility of embedding augmented reality. So the lo-fi version is that we had a lecturer. We have so-called teaching fellows at our universities, and they basically apply for a 2-year grant to spend 1 day of their week on research on innovative technologies they want to use in their courses, and that could help other lecturers also to develop their courses further. So we had one colleague, Martin Stellingwerf, working on augmented reality. He came from an architecture and industrial design background, and he developed only existing mobile and applications for developing augmented reality content. So there is a very low-fi and low access solution which uses existing applications. You just have, we're talking about licensing costs probably for software for one workplace of something between extensive apps from or really powerful apps for 10 euros up to probably a workplace or workbench solution of 50 or 100 euros. So little costs for with which you can develop augmented reality content. And the advantage is that most modern mobile devices, let's say you need to, there are different platforms for that, but most are existing in the hands of people, I would say, as soon as they have a camera and do the embedding. This is the lo-fi realization, which requires very little investment. And then the top of the notch development we're now looking into with 4D volumetric capturing basically needs a full recording set. So you need to set up a stage with space sensors and cameras, which we're now looking at costs of 100 to up to 300,000 euros for a recording studio in which you can record multiple person interactions into volumetric data. And then of course also on the replay side, you can go from a student, let's say augmented reality HoloLens, then you are at 3,000 euros or 2,000 euros for a workplace at home to replay the augmented reality content. And of course, also for public spaces, these things are still quite expensive. So I would say we talk about a range from where you could have really 100 euros for a content creation place to replaying on existing smartphones and mobile devices, up to a range for having a full TV recording studio for volumetric data and having a real good replay experience. That is I hope that helps.
Mm. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much. That was very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, I think that was an important question that was raised, Marcus, because it's a matter of us advancing towards technology, but also being cognizant of the cost towards our institution and the ICT infrastructure that we need in place. But I like the fact that we could vary these costs, so it allows us that flexibility to develop and advance with these types of trends as well. Marcus, I think we'll take this last question that's on the chat by Tabita, and one of the issues in the South African context is the idea of Africanization, decolonization, Africanization, and the shift towards bringing in multi-languages. So in terms of multilingual, these mobile platforms, capability of it, have you all used anything of that sort?
Yeah, help me a bit with that question. So multilingual content or delivery in different languages. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. I cannot. I mean, I can only say something in the context of translation and natural language processing of mostly European languages. But there, I can tell you, I was myself really surprised by the level. Of course, we now get language recognition and speech-to-text recognition and translation from natural language processing engines. So just to give you a little example, I recently produced a MOOC for research methods for the extension school in Delft. I did all my, I just recorded my videos, and within minutes, I had a complete transcript into English and a complete translation into 2 other languages. And I had to correct I would say only 2 to 5% maximum of the text that came out of these engines. So I think with that level of quality, you get very little additional effort you need to bring video or other content into other languages and make it more accessible.
Thanks, Marcus. I think you answered that question quite well. Thank you very, very much, Marcus. I think this was a fascinating session. As always, you never fail to impress us with the amount of knowledge you got, but also the way you plot technology in terms of benchmarking internationally.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, and yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, I think it got cut off a bit. So thanks, Marcus, once again for this innovative session, but more specifically, your ability to plot us and give us some direction in the developing context as well. I think yeah, you plotted it quite well, but also you've given us opportunities for us to think amidst our costs in South Africa, amidst our ICT infrastructure, how we can still advance and make higher education innovative in terms of meeting the demands of our students. I think Carol Prince's last comment on the chat is quite interesting, is that our students are at a young age where they are all mobile. Basically, everybody has access to mobile. And, you know, we always say that some of these students have more fancier mobile devices than some of our academics. So the potential to do this kind of stuff is really, really there. But I also think it's a matter of now the willpower of ICT together with our institutions to realign our strategies in teaching and learning, as well as our government to start funding institutions to advance this type of developments. Because if we want to make ourselves, and COVID-19, the crisis of COVID-19 has shown us that if we do not start investing in ICT infrastructure, the gaps are going to grow much, much more wider for us. So this is actually quite excellent. So thank you very, very much, Marcus, for this and for opening up the session for us. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to more future collaborations with you. And I know that this is the start of a great journey. So thank you, Marcus. Unfortunately, we can't applaud, everybody can't applaud, but I guarantee you from everybody's side, thank you very, very much, Marcus, and we'll chat soon. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our next speaker is Dr. Andrea Inamarto dos Santos. But I think while she gets ready, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes for a coffee break or a bathroom break. You can just quickly gather yourself. So 2 minutes time, we'll start with Dr. Andrea Inamarto. Thanks, Andrea. 2 minutes, colleagues, and then we'll start. It's 11 o'clock. Thanks. It's 11, and at 11:02 we'll start.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you very, very much, colleagues. You'll now note that your mics are switched off. When we start the Q&A session, we will then give you an opportunity to unmute yourself, but please feel free to also post your questions for Andrea in your comments, as we did with Marcus, and we'll filter it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege now to introduce you to another one of our high-profile scholars, really well-known in a space, Dr. Andrea Inamarto dos Santos, and she's going to share with us today on open pedagogies for a digital era. And I know this is quite critical for us in the Unisa context, as well as the South African context, on how do we unpack openness and what do we mean by open pedagogy. So let me give you a brief background about Andrea. Andrea is a researcher in educational technology with a focus on open education, digital competence of educators, and blockchain in education. Her role involves research and policy support on ICT for learning, skills, and open educational resources, OERs. Her work contributes to finding opportunities and challenges of ICT and OER implementation at a policy level to innovate and modernize teaching and learning and training practices in Europe. Her current focus is on the promotion and uptake of openness in higher education institutions. Andrea has a PhD in educational technology from the Open University of the UK, 2011, and a master's in research methods in educational technology from the same institution. She also has a master's in linguistics and literary studies in English language from the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. She worked as an OER researcher for the Open University between 2006 and 2011, and has since been involved in several other OER and ICT related research projects in the UK and abroad. Andrea has produced a national report on OER in Brazil, which was published by UNESCO ITE. She also has acted as a consultant for DigiLearn, focusing on awareness raising and continuous professional development on OER and open education for governmental bodies, private and public higher education institutions, and high-profile enterprise in Brazil and Latin America. Now, the reason why we opted specifically for Andrea, she's no stranger to the Unisa context. She's been at Unisa before. She's spoken at Unisa. She's also familiar with the African context. And in addition to being well positioned in Europe and the developing context, she has not lost a grounding of the developing context. And this is why it actually gives us a good way to contextualize some of her developments in terms of the international trends to the developing context. So thank you very much, Andrea, and shall I say, welcome to Unisa. The platform is yours.
Thank you very much, Denzel. Good morning, everyone. Can I just confirm you can hear me well? Yes?
You're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. So it's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. As Denzel has just said, I have been to Unisa back in 2012 in the context of your first open and distance learning conference. It was an amazing experience, and I have very good memories of being there with you. So thank you again for allowing me to be here today, exchanging with you, learning from you, and I really hope this will be a conversation between us. One thing that perhaps has not been mentioned clearly is that nowadays I'm based in Spain, and I work for the European Commission, which is the executive body of the European Union, responsible for the budget of the Union. No, but we also have different departments that we call Directorate Generals. And I work for one called the Joint Research Center, specifically doing research in education and this interface between research and policy, and research and practice. But today, I'm not here representing the European Commission. I must make it clear. I'm here on a personal capacity, speaking to you and sharing with you a little bit of my experience acquired not only working for the European Commission or at the Open University in the European context, but also as a consultant when I was working in Brazil and with Latin American countries, because I think that in many ways we have similar challenges, and I think this is what I'd like to share, and I'd like us to think of our contexts, transversally, right? So I'm going to share my screen with you, so bear with me a second. Okay, I think we are good to go. If not, just please let me know, okay? Great, so I chose to zoom into pedagogies today because I think pedagogies are essential. It's about teaching and learning practices. So when I talk about pedagogies, I'm really talking about teaching and learning. But in order to do that, I would really like to go beyond and to start from the macro level, so that we can position a little bit more what we mean when we talk about openness, what we mean when we talk about open education, open educational resources, and what's the role of institutional policies in there, what's the role of individual policies, because I think that we as individuals, we also have our policies, the way we work, it's the way we have agency over our work. So these are the things I'd like to zoom in and out with you, and I invite you to think along with me so that we can have a conversation towards the end of the talk. So let's just revisit a little bit the context that we have nowadays. So we think that just the pre-COVID era, no, we knew that digital was important. Digital has always been important, no? Digital was not only important, but digital was desired. Digital education in its different ways and varieties, using different technologies, no? And then in the pre-COVID area, I'm really referring back to 2017, the European Commission has launched a communication to all European member states. It's showing there on the screen. The communication in Europe is really a document that sets out the strategies that the Commission will follow in order to promote a certain idea, for example, or certain practices. Just to remind you that education in Europe for every single member state or country that is member in the European Union is really independent. It's autonomous. Every country has autonomy to decide upon their educational practices, their policies, etc. So the European Commission just really provides some sort of guidance, some sort of tools for thinking which member states can tap into or not if they wish. But with these ideas, we also have over here in Europe some sort of financial investment whenever possible to member states to uptake those ideas. So this communication was back in 2017, talking about a renewed agenda for higher education. So how should higher education institutions in Europe change? What should be different? And with this renewed agenda, there was this discourse of modernization of higher education, right? So I do not even know if modernization is the right word, because, one may think, okay, maybe we should be talking more about contemporary ways, no? But let's use modernizing as the key word chosen in this communication. And one important thing that you will notice is that, of course, it's talking about digital readiness, it's talking about consortia, but it's also talking about open education. Here, let me move this above. It's also talking about open education. See, what will the European Commission do? Back in 2017, the European Commission decided to provide guidance on open education initiatives for higher education institutions. And I'll show you some of it alongside other ideas, right? But so open education was already positioned as something is important for the renewal agenda of higher education institutions. But then, obviously, it was desired, the combination of digital and openness, etc. Then, in the post-COVID era, let's say that we are facing it just now, digital sometimes, or for most institutions, not only in Europe, but across the world, is now the default mode, particularly for higher education. For example, I'm speaking from Spain today, and here in Spain, all educational institutions for higher education have decided to go online and to have exclusively online courses, right? And so students only go to the physical spaces whenever they need to visit a laboratory, whenever they really need to go there to get a book or something where their physical presence is really essential. But so that shows us that really we can do a lot online, and that distance is not always distant. We can be very close, by acting at a distance, let's put it this way. So there is no choice anymore. I think we're facing a situation in which digital is really compulsory, but there we are facing, in many cases, a digital crisis. an institutional crisis and a personal crisis. No, why? Because maybe we realized that if we were doing some sort of open and digital and online education before, we now need to do more because it is the default mode. No, if you were not doing this before, then there are many people nervous about it because suddenly they realize, oh my God, I really have to catch up. I do not know what to do. I don't know where to start from. And it can be really scary, right? So there are many academics, by academics, I mean teaching staff, mostly teaching staff in universities. They are really facing this sort of crisis, but not only institutions that now need to provide all the scaffolding for people to go open and academics, but also students. We realize that many students are not really fully equipped to study on the digital space. No, so here we need to think what we can do about this. First of all, to think that we are not alone. We're not alone in this adventure of moving more and more towards digital, and we are all trying and adapt our methodologies, the way we teach and the way we learn, to the online sphere. Now, there is a requirement for a new modus operandi, a new way of thinking, and this requires, of course, rethinking and reskilling ourselves and rethinking our practices. And I'm talking about institutional practices, and I'm talking about individual practices also. Okay, so if we move on, we can talk about, I wanted to put it down here. Okay, we can talk about open education and openness as a whole, right? So what do we mean when we ask somebody, what is open education for you? Can you think of it? Can you please now think of it? If you have a definition, go to the chat and put it there because we can have a look at it later on. So what is open education for you? Your individual definition of open education. Please do share your thoughts on this. So one thing that we realized over the years, carrying out research in this field, in Brazil, in the UK, with European countries, all the 27 member states before we were 28, is that it doesn't matter who you speak to, this person is going to have a different definition of open education. For some, it's about open educational resources. For others, it's about MOOCs. For others, it's about simply putting content available for free. So everyone will have a different definition of open education, right? So this is a challenge to start with. When we talk about openness and opening up, it's a challenge. Now, when we talk about open educational resources, perhaps we are speaking about something a bit more clear, clearer because it's about using a license to make content available. But even though there's still a lot of confusion because many people think that open education and open educational resources are the same, and they are not really. We tend to see open education as a broader thing, like an umbrella term in which underneath we include open educational resources, but many other things, right? So what does it mean to be an open institution? Do we have to be a fully open institution, like named Open University of, etc.? No, the country's name. No, do we need to have that title to consider ourselves an open institution, or can we all be open to a certain extent? No, fully open or to a certain extent. So here's a question. Now, open educational practices. We talk a lot about open educational practices known as OEP. What do they mean exactly? What does it mean to be an open educator? What does it mean to perform open educational practices, to engage with OEP? And above all, what does it mean to be an open learner? No, and I remind you that here we are talking about both students that are formally registered and students that are non-formally registered at an institution. So we may even think about open education as a way of including the ones that were left out from formal registration. I know that, for example, universities now, or Unisa, for example, had to cut out the entry, by many students. I think it was 20,000 students. So how can we include them back into higher education, at least having access to this knowledge, as open learners, for example? So that's something that we could consider. So when we talk about what does open education mean, here we go. Sorry, I am opening by mistake here. So what does open education mean? We have to understand that no one size fits all. There are different definitions for open education. How open can you be is another question. What does it mean to be open, and how open can I, as an individual lecturer, as an individual teacher, be? And how open do you want to be? Because there is a difference between what your institution allows you to do and what you want to do and what you know you can do. So these are all things that we should think about. Now, the openness spectrum. I told you before that there is a degree, kind of a gradation for openness. One can be more open or less open, right? So let's think of ways an institution can be open. And no entry requirements, for example. No, if we look over here, no entry requirements, you may say, okay, all students can come and study. They do not need to have formal degrees, like it's the case of the Open University UK, or I'm going to remove barriers. No, it's about all removing barriers. So I'm going to reduce fees or not charge fees or no previous qualifications. I'm going to be open as to teaching methods. I'm going to be open as to all of them. So we need really to think about what it means to be open in our own institutions, right? And now let's think about open licenses. If you're talking about open educational resources in particular, we know that it's also a degree of openness from less open to more open or fully open. No? And that means, for example, you can have the license, the CC BY one, which is the most open license that we have, but you can also have licenses that give some sort of restrictions to the user, because a license tells the user what they can or cannot do with the content that we release. No, so some licenses give more permissions, other licenses give fewer permissions, so they are more restrictive. So this is also a degrees of openness. It is part of the openness spectrum. So again, another reflection that is important for us to have is how open do we want to be as an institution, you know, and why. You know, what's the benefit of being open, and we are going to talk about it, and as an individual as well. And that's why there is no single answer about openness. And this is why sometimes it's so difficult to pin it. You know, people say it's more of a concept than everything else. But above all, it's a way of thinking about education. It's a way of thinking about inclusion. It's a way of thinking about modernizing education using technologies in the open world above all, right? So if we move on, I want to show you very briefly a framework for open education published back in 2016, which was focusing on higher education institutions. And to come up with this framework, more than 40 experts across the globe were involved, and a lot of back and forths in terms of research, 3 years to develop. And then there is a proposed definition for open education, because we thought that exactly because it's not something that we can pin, then we can give an easy definition. We needed to propose at least a working definition, a way of understanding open education, so that we could move on and talk about it more freely, more in a more straightforward way. So here we go. It's a way of carrying out education, often using digital technologies. Its aim is to widen access and participation to everyone by removing barriers and making learning accessible, abundant, and customizable for all. It offers multiple ways of teaching and learning, building and sharing knowledge. It also provides a variety of access routes to formal and non-formal education and connects the two. So this is a working definition, right? And so what would I like to highlight in this definition? Digital technologies, widen access and participation, removing barriers, and customizable for all, so personalized learning. So these things seem to be still very much updated. No, we are talking about including digital technologies even more in our teaching and learning, widening access because it's the mission of the university, widening participation, inclusion, because we want a better society. We also need to remove barriers, even the technology gap that has been probably increased nowadays for the ones who do not have access or do not have ICT infrastructure. So how do we think about it? And customization. There is no problem in also thinking about making learning more personal. Likewise, sharing knowledge, and this is where, openness and open pedagogies will fit in. How do we share knowledge? And to me, a very important aspect is the bridging of formal and non-formal education, right? Connecting them. Now, we know that the most successful openness initiatives in higher education are the ones that have a bottom-up and a top-down approach, right? What does that mean? First of all, the university has a clear policy on openness, so they do stop to think about the things I'm talking about. What does openness mean in my institution? We will include it in our mission statement. We'll be clear about it, you know, and we'll define policies. We'll put up strategy. We will identify leaders, and we'll give all the infrastructure necessary for my university to go open. More or less open depending on what the institution chooses. No, so there is also this top-down level where university management is university managers are engaged. They clearly define an institutional policy, and there is faculty support. Implementation is coordinated and supported. So this is the top-down approach. Now, the bottom-up is extremely important. It's where the two meet that success is really guaranteed. There are champions. Teachers, lecturers, academics can be and quite often are the champions, the ambassadors for open education or for OER, for example, in their universities. And it's very important that the university management is able to identify those people and tap into, that excitement, that knowledge to share among all. So individuals are key. And we have to find them, and they need to be motivated and supported. And if they are there, they also need to know why they are so motivated and supported, because there are advantages in being open. Learners, as I said before, who are our learners? And so how can they support us in this adventure of going open? And colleagues, how can we exchange with our colleagues and also the wider community in order to meet the two, bottom-up, top-down approach to openness? Now, I want to present you this framework. The OpenEdu framework has 10 dimensions for open education. So we thought about open education, as I said before, as an umbrella term, right, in which we would fit not only open educational resources, but much more. So it has to do with policies, it has to do with strategies, it has to do with a new mindset, a new way of approaching education to modernize education. Definitely not the solution for everything, and definitely not the only possible approach to modernize education, to be a better institution, but one very real and possible approach, right? And this is what I'm showing you. For example, you would ask me, Andrea, so where do we fit in content? Where do we fit in OER? So I would say in the content dimension. We deliberately did not call the content dimension OER because we wanted to go much further than OER in order to break this idea that open education and OER are similar concepts, right? So where do we include MOOCs, for example? For example, MOOCs could be everywhere really, because it's about content, it's about pedagogy, because it's a way of teaching. It uses technology, so it's also in the technology dimension. It can be collaborative, so it also touches upon the collaboration dimension. It can also be strategic for the university, so it can be part of the strategy. And sometimes it requires academics as leaders, the ones that are upfront in creating MOOCs, in sharing their knowledge. So I think that the MOOCs are a good example to show that these dimensions are transversal. They interrelate with one another. They do not work alone. And the 6 dimensions in the center, we call them the core dimensions, right? They are the basis for open educational practices, but then supported at all levels by the outward dimensions that we call transversal dimensions. So we need technology. So here's the digital revolution. We need quality. Quality is extremely important, for open education. It's not about, whatever we'll do. We do not need to have absolutely perfect and edited content, not at all, to go open, but we need to consider quality and consult the quality standards of our institutions to be able to create quality content, that can be improved by being open. We need to identify leaders and to have some sort of leadership, and we also need a strategy and make that strategy visible to all as part of our mission statement, or at least visible to all. This is very important. So people know what they can do, what they cannot do, and therefore choose how they will operate and how open they want to be, because academics have the freedom to decide, no? Okay, so I wanted to think, please, about these 6 dimensions. Now, so I told you about content, I told you about pedagogy, and we are going to zoom into the pedagogy dimension for openness today. Recognition is also about removing barriers for entry, the offering of micro-credentials, for example, or credits for open learning, for open studies. How can we bring those students back into the system, even if they are not formally registered? So there is a lot in the recognition dimension, collaboration and networks with different institutions. Research is about open science, you know, of making our science visible. This is extremely important. Open data sharing. Data sharing is extremely important as well. And above all, access. You know? And access is not only about making content available, but also working towards accessibility and including all sorts of learners that have some sort of disability. So we provide content in different ways. What can we do as individuals to provide content in different ways? We could not only create our content and release, for example, in the written format, but we could also perhaps voice record it, for example, no? Creating a podcast to make it more open and to fit different audiences, no? And so, the web pages we design, how accessible are they? So everything is about being more open as to methodologies, open as to audiences, because we never know exactly who can be there looking at our content, no? So when we choose to modernize higher education via going open, I want you to look at the blue side now for the moment, please. Many people say, oh, it's all about marketization. No, the universities are only thinking about marketing, about business models, about becoming more competitive in the market. Okay, first of all, that's a reality, because we do live in a capitalist society, no? And even public universities, they do need money to go forward, to move forward. But there are different ways of approaching this open education. You do not need to think about it in this capitalist or marketing way, although marketing is an advantage, no, because there is a lot of visibility to open education. But you can think of this as an increased market opportunities for different people, no, for the university itself to raise visibility and to raise reputation. But on the other hand, you can also think of it in the red side of the screen as a way of increasing inclusion, opportunities, of sharing knowledge as a public good, because there's thinking that everything that is made with public money, no, because imagine the knowledge produced by a university is actually paid with public money, no, of taxes. That sort of knowledge produced with public money should be part of the commons and should be made available and free to all. And I think that's the underlying principle of open education that we are talking about, right? But not only content, also teaching practices. No, the way we teach, the way we learn, the technologies we use, everything can be open. In the degree, in that spectrum, as we choose, but everything can be open somehow. So sharing knowledge as a public good, technology as a public good, teaching practices as a public good, that's also part of going open. And most importantly, I think, is experimenting with new technologies and methodologies. And this is what we need nowadays, no? More and more experimentation, right? Trying new things, rethinking our practices. So let's zoom into these dimensions interrelationship. I told you before that they all interrelate. And I want to zoom into openness in relation to pedagogy, but also in relation to technology, because we're talking about going digital, no? So the first thing that we discussed is, what does it mean to be an open educator? And I told you, you will define what it means for you in relation to what you want and in relation to the policies of your institution, right? What does it mean to be an open institution? It's important that the institution has a clear understanding of how open they want to be and how open they can be and why and how. In terms of the power of choice, we can always choose open source technologies, open standards to deliver, like open formats. For example, LibreOffice, instead of choosing private technologies that we have to pay for, we can choose open technologies because we contribute to the commons. We are not locked to a specific vendor, therefore it's better use of public money. I was very glad to hear that Unisa is moving to Moodle, because Moodle is an example of an open source technology. They important to be interoperable because it allows us to share and reuse that knowledge, therefore making better use of public money because we are reusing, right? And what sort of educational technologies can we use? But then we need to think about pedagogies as well. And in my view, we should not forget the learning theories and the methodologies that we are going to incorporate into this process of openness and modernizing education. So again, open pedagogies is about how to do open education beyond OER. OER is extremely important and perhaps the basics, the core practice in open education. But alone, it does not normally reach the targets that we normally want to achieve, which is much broader than simply sharing content. It's about inclusion, it's about right pedagogies, right technologies, leadership, strategy, and really benchmarking, even internationally. Why not? We can also benchmark internationally, because if you're open, people can see what you do, but you can also see what the others do. And I think that's also a way of benchmarking, open practices, and it's about an ethos, it's about a mindset change that's extremely important, and technology comes to support the whole thing. If a virtual learning environment as Moodle is a core technology, but then you have other apps and you have other tools and you have other ways of teaching and learning, as for example, using mobile learning and other ways. So I want to talk about 4 steps to open pedagogies, right? So how can we then, we started from the macro level, thinking about mission statements, meaning, what it means to us, etc. But how can we now zoom into the practices of the educator, the educators themselves, because that's where educators have agency. It starts with their own teaching process. How they teach is where they have immediate agency. Even if the university does not have a policy on open education, academics have the choice to a certain extent, obviously always respecting, the institutional policies, but they do have a choice to a certain extent, decide how open they want to be. So first of all is self-reflection. There is a tendency here now in Europe to promote self-reflection as a way of helping teachers to identify their digital competencies and where they stand, right? So we'll talk about self-reflection. Revisiting active methodologies. What does it mean? Methodologies, knowing number 3. Number 2, revisiting learning theories. Why do I need to, as a teacher, why do I need to know about educational theories? And number 4, choose technology and then apply openness to this. We need to have this panoramic understanding of everything that is involved to become an open educator, to be engaged with open educational practices, so we can actually bring it to practice, right? So let's start with self-reflection. So really, where do I stand in my teaching? How do I use digital technologies? What sort of learning theories underpin my choice of methodological practices? Because we quite often talk about technologies and forget to reflect that technologies cannot teach alone. We need to know the methodologies that we are using, and the learning theories that we are going to use. So I think that first of all, we need to revisit learning theories, so that we can kind of position ourselves somehow as to how we want to teach, and then choose the methodologies and then the technologies. Okay, so for self-reflection, we developed back in 2017 practical guidelines on open education for academics. So this is available online. I invite you to take a look at it. This is really to strengthen the bottom-up approach. And we talk about the dimension content, we talk about the 10 dimensions, but here we propose some statements for self-reflection, right? So you can go through each dimension as an individual academic and think and self-reflect about your practice. For example, number 1, I can identify the license of an educational resource, yes or no? Or do I think that everything that is online and available is an open educational resource? So number 2, I openly license the educational material that I produce, yes or no? So statements for self-reflection. I always say that a framework is a guidance for anything that we want to do. They do not have all the right answers for everything. They are there to provide a tool for help us think through our practices, and we can always adapt those frameworks to our needs, no, to our contexts. And I think there is a beauty in having frameworks as something we can start from. And from there, we can keep on self-reflecting on our practices, right? So I tag, number 4, I tag OER properly to increase their searchability and findability. Do we remember to tag OER? Do we have a system institutionally to tag OER, for example, no, or our individual systems? These are all things that we need to think about. And these statements for self-reflection go from 1 to 4 with increasing level of engagement in the theme, no? So easier topics to more complex ones like tagging, for example. For example, in the pedagogy dimension, no? What could you think about it? I apply open educational practices in my teaching, but first of all, you need to understand what open educational practices are, no? So moving on, open education stakeholders. Always think of institution, no? The institution, the academic, the learner, and the community, and the society as a whole. So I wanted to show you, for example, that we have benefits in going open, but we also have challenges, no? So you can promote open education in a number of different ways, but then why? Because you can have more visibility and it's not bad. You can use open content to give learners a taster of the content you produce. Institutions can gain visibility, academics can gain visibility. Society has benefits from economic savings, no? Challenges, because there is a beautiful discourse on democratization of education behind openness, but there are also challenges, no? Can I choose the best license as an academic? Am I going to lose my author's rights? No, you are not. You know, you're just giving permissions to the use of your content. Learners will need to be able to find and search OER. They need to know what OER is, no? Institutions sometimes may resist. Academics sometimes may resist. So how do we deal with resistance? And then do we tap into resilience? How are we going to deal with that? And what's our understanding of the commons? No? Do I understand the commons as a space, normally in the digital sphere, where I can share with others what I produce, you know, and I can see what other produces for the benefit of all. And there is a regulation agreed amongst that community on how that commons should work. I think that's the first principle that we need to understand, no? Pedagogy as well. When you open up your pedagogies, you record a video, you put it online, other people see how you teach, but you can also tap into how other people teach. Therefore, you can learn, learning from one another. We can use a more learner-centered approach. We can improve teaching, you know, because we are always learning, and we can increase access to courses. There are challenges. We have to re-examine our practices. We need to learn. We need to, learners need to be more self-regulated. Institutions can face resistance from some academics in going open. It's normal. But society will need to learn, you know, to appreciate and respect this type of pedagogy. So it's just to quickly go through with you that if you look into this document, you're going to have examples of challenges and benefits of going open, okay, for academics, for all these actors, these 4 actors, no? For example, there are challenges for leadership for openness as well. Now let's move on with the second one, revisiting learning theories. I told you that I thought it was extremely important because I wanted to finalize talking about the pedagogies, because if you want to be now be online and just keep repeating what you used to do in a face-to-face class, which is what many teachers do, that's going to be more complicated to enjoy, to make it a joyful experience for teachers and learners, no? Because if you repeat that, let's say, what is it called? The banking concept of education, no? The transmission model, where the teacher speaks and holds the knowledge and the learners learn only. If we come from that sort of behaviorist approach, we may perhaps not be using all the affordances of technologies, but then we need to understand, you know, the learning theories behind it, what it means to have a more behaviorist approach that we still see so much in higher education institutions with lecturers, for a change, in comparison to a change to a more collaborative, social constructivist approach, and how do we promote it using technologies, but also in an open way, no? So number 3, once we kind of revisit our practice, so we start with the self-reflection, we revisit our practices, then we think about choosing the technologies. And to me, that's a third step, you know. So first, how do I want to teach? How collaborative do I want to teach? And then 3, you know, what are the technologies that I'm going to use for that? You know, apart from the virtual learning environment, what else can I do? And then finally, you can think of openness principles, discussions. Sorry, I skipped the active methodologies. No, so you can. Let me go back here. So you have to think about revisiting also your methodologies. Do you know, as a lecturer, what sorts of methodologies you can tap into to teach your subject? Do you have clear methodologies that you can say, okay, for teaching a subject, I'm going to use X methodology, or a mix of methodologies and a mix of X technologies, and then I'm going to go open with that to increase the power of reach and outreach, no? So I think it's important that we know what's available for us out there. So here I give just some examples. We could dive into these as peer instruction. There is a real structure for a peer instruction-based class, no? E-portfolios, project-based learning. I know a lot of you are using project-based learning, flipped classroom. There are so many active methodologies that incorporate more collaborative principles, and then when combined with technologies and combined with openness, then we have the real power for modernizing education, right? So to me, that's the 4th step. You choose the technologies and then you apply openness, whether it is to making the content available, the content produced by yourself available, the way you teach available, whether it is by the outcomes of your students available, so that there are different ways, right, of applying openness principles, but you need to know what they are. So just to finalize and open for questions, I'd like to give an example with an e-portfolio. E-portfolio is not only a way of assessing, but also a way of teaching and learning, no? So e-portfolio is part of assessment, but you can use that as a longer project when you can put your students to develop skills and competences that can be transferable to the market and to their lives overall. If they, for example, register online in a blog, just as an example, know how they teach, how they learn, and all the assignments they do, how they interact with other people. They can learn how to write more clearly, to select information, to present themselves to the world, to prompt critical thinking, to use technologies, which is really important as a transferable skill to the job market. Know how you deal with technology, how you assess information and misinformation, register your journey, and above all, contribute to the commons if you make this journey open, right? So we will have the chance to talk further about methodologies and openness, but open pedagogies are a way to support the modernizing of education to higher education institutions via the agency the teachers and the students have over their own content. So to finalize, here are some of the benefits that I list for you: to foster inclusion and development, to increase equality and scalability, scalability also for open learners, the ones that are not in the system, and above all, going open with open educational practices and pedagogies can help us empower learners and promote innovation. So that's it from me. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment, and I welcome questions, please.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Andrea. As I listen to your presentation, it's amazing how the kind of concepts that you are using dominates discourse in South Africa. So you've got your finger right exactly where we need to be. While Richard starts to open up the platform and the colleagues start to get ready with their questions, I think for me what's quite critical is how you flag the degrees of openness. And I think at Unisa we need to engage that conversation a bit more critically. Is what do we mean by openness as an institution, and how do we actually conceptualize the degrees of openness? And the second point was that the idea of new mindsets, the modernization of our education. And the 4 points that you spoke about, the idea of technology, quality, but also strategy and leadership. And I think that for us is quite critical as an institution, is the mandate and the will that the institution drives for us. And then the last points that you spoke about, the idea of open technology and pedagogy. And I think while we are advancing towards rethinking what ODEL means for us as an institution, which is coupled with technology, it may also force us to rethink or widen the discourse within South Africa, within Unisa, of how can we think of an open pedagogy that brings to the fore the type of openness that we want as an institution. So thank you very, very much for that, Andrea. That was excellent.
Thank you.
I see, colleagues, we're going to open up the platform for questions. But I see Professor Mpini Makwa is in our platform as well. And for those that don't know, Prof Makwa Mpini is the Commonwealth of Learning Chain Open Educational Resources. And I think I won't do justice if I don't give a few minutes to say just a few words. Prof Mpini, would you please do us the honor, just a few words?
Hello, Mpini.
Oh, hi, Andrea. It's so good to see you. Andrea and I were in the same class many years ago. We did our PhD together, and I'm so happy and proud that we are following the same trajectory of openness and open learning. You know, you were spot on throughout, and I just highlighted some of the areas that you have actually mentioned. And I think one area that we neglect completely in this process of teaching and learning and our focus on technology, we neglect leadership and strategy. Mm-hmm. And those are the people who are supposed to drive the whole process. If leadership does not understand what openness is, then they won't be able to, even if at Unisa, believe me, at Unisa we have policies, we have strategies, but they're all beautiful documents that are put aside somewhere. And hence, if you don't have leadership that buys into that, then it's a problem, because that is what defines us as a unique university within the context of South Africa. Because if we don't want to be open, we should remove the word open and become distance learning. And that's a different story altogether. But if you want to be open, we need to look into the principles of openness. And the other issue, just the last one that I want to raise, is that we are in the education. The nature of education is about sharing. That's the nature of education. If you can't share, then you are not educating anybody. It's not about closing things, it's about sharing. And in our context, we have a mandate, we have a social justice mandate to ensure inclusivity, accessibility, flexibility, all these things. And I cringed when the government says we are cutting down on students. And part of the reason is that no one can tell them that you can't do that. This is not about face-to-face. We need to be scalable. We need to understand how do we support students at a scale. Thank you again, Andrea. I'm not going to take your time. People want to listen to you. They listen to me all the time. Yeah, it's so good to see you.
Likewise, it's a great pleasure to have you in the audience and to be able to exchange with you. And thank you for your insights as well. Very, very good. Thank you, Mpini.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Mpini. Okay, so colleagues, the floor is now open. I see Professor Anna-Marie Bates had a quite interesting perspective on what open education is. Professor Anna-Marie Bates, do you want to expand a bit on that?
Hi, Denzel. No, I'm no professor.
I can't see you. I'd love to see your cameras on. I don't see anyone now.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good idea, colleague.
Okay.
Well, if you can, if not, no problem. Okay, absolutely no problem. We go on with the audio only. Hello, Anne-Marie.
Hi. No, I just made a comment because, you know, openness, the word, if you just think of the word openness, and then you come, you deal with so many other barriers to that openness. You know, we've got policies, we don't have enough resources. We are talking about skilled people to facilitate the learning, and all those things have an influence on how open, you know, an institution can be. So yes, we always need to consider the context in which we work and what is possible in that. And you know, we don't need to be pessimistic. We can still work with what we have.
Yes,
Thanks.
That's right, Marie. Very good point. And that's why I'm so glad we have scales of openness now, so we can do that. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Anna-Marie. I see Solosh. Solosh, do you want to raise a question?
Good morning, colleagues. I just want to add that if we have to rethink open pedagogy, it actually entails us to rethink our teaching and learning philosophies, you know, as a precursor to open pedagogy. But this doesn't mean that we need to really, you know, reconceptualize or rethink the inclusion of connectivism, constructivist approaches to learning, the use of technology and so forth. So, you know, academics who are more familiar with the traditional face-to-face classrooms really need to reconsider and reconceptualize their own thinking and learning teaching philosophies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Even nowadays, even more, I suppose. No?
Yeah.
So,
and I just want to add, Prof, that, you know, when we talk about open pedagogy, one document or one very critical framework that stood out for me is what we have at Unisa called the, you know, the framework for the implementation of a team approach. And we actually use this framework as a guiding document to engage critical role players, you know, such as, you know, experts from the industries and so forth. And for me, as you spoke about open pedagogies and, you know, bringing in the experts and so forth, this document stood out quite profoundly for me. Thank you for that.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. I see there's a lot of positive comments on the platform, so they really enjoyed the talk. Andrea, just maybe just a last question from myself. You spoke about the idea of opening up the education space as a response to even our country mandate to educate our citizens, educate our students. And you mentioned something quite interesting, the idea of micro-credentialing, which could be a way of addressing the deficit of the 20,000 students which we had to cut out at Unisa. Now, I can understand a lot of academics may say, yes, it's good to cut it off because of our capacity at Unisa, but it is also a question of the university mandate as well as the government mandate. Your ideas of micro-credentialing as an institution?
I am a big fan of micro-credentials, and as I am a big fan of blockchain to register micro-credentials, I think there's huge potential in that. And because universities do not need to stop their core business and the traditional way of, you know, delivering the package, you know, of the 4-year degree. They do not necessarily need to stop, but I think that we need to think of the job market. Do people really, can people nowadays really wait for 4 or 5 years to get a degree, to get into the job market? Or as they finish subject areas from that degree, for example, it's just an example, in a modular way, why don't we provide them with micro-credentials so they can already make that move, you know, quicker, sooner, without having to wait that long? Because everything moves so fast nowadays. Even upskilling, reskilling needs to take place in a much faster way. So I do think that micro-credentials, both in the formal education side, where the university can start giving micro-credentials as, you know, the students accomplish certain benchmarks, you know, is a way of going forward to help that transition to the job market and upskilling, but also in relation to open education and non-formal learning with MOOCs, you know, with learning that is more free And I also think micro-credentials have a role to play in there for society in general. So I am a fan of it, yes.
Oh, thank you. I think that's something that we maybe need to rethink at Unisa as well, is how do we address the skills deficit by going the route of micro-credentialing, probably. So thank you very much, Andrea.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very, very much, Andrea. I think this has been an insightful session for us. But more specifically, as I said, and I keep echoing this point, I can't believe how you captured some of those critical words in the discourses that are in South Africa. I mean, it was on point. Prof. Mpini, I see you wanted to raise a question, Prof. Mpini.
Okay, just one last thing that I wanted to say. I think part of our challenges, it's not necessarily going open, but it is the leadership and the strategies that needs to guide the university to go that route. And because also there are so many regulatory bodies that stops us from doing the things that we are doing. And I'm so glad that COVID came, because COVID threw everything out of the window, including the regulations, including all those things. But what we need to do is to rethink and reposition ourselves during this time. It's precisely during this time when we need to position ourselves and rethink about what is it that we need to do. The second aspect is that unless we train people to do things, so what Andrea is referring to in terms of the pedagogy and learning theories and whatever, this will never happen, because people are bound to go back to what they were used to doing. Because after COVID and after the emergency thing of moving into an online space and trying to do things, not necessarily the correct way of teaching in an online space, it's critical that at this time we need to reskill. That reskilling, the lifelong learning is going to be much more critical now post this thing than in any other thing. And that is what is going to define the resilience of the university. Not courses, not any other thing, but being relevant and being able to speak to the community that we say we are serving. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Denzel and Unisa. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you. Great event.
Thank you, Andrea, and we look forward to much more collaboration with you. I know that you are hosting a separate workshop for us on the 26th of February and the 1st of March. Colleagues, unfortunately, space is limited. So if you want to really get into Andrea's workshop, it's a very competitive space. So please email us, and there's an application form that you can fill in. We only have 50 spaces, and it is and I've already got so much of requests, so I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but Andrea is hosting an interesting workshop for us on open pedagogy. So if you would like to, just drop me an email and we can facilitate that for her. Thank you, Andrea. And as I said, this is definitely the beginning of a new relationship with us with Unisa. So thank you, Andrea.
Thanks. Good to see you all. Hello. Thanks. Hello, Isha.
Okay, so thanks, colleagues. Colleagues, our next speaker is also no stranger to the South African context, to the African context. It gives me much pleasure to now invite Dr. Yeshe Moore. I actually, it's quite ironic, but I actually met Dr. Yeshe Moore, when he was delivering a global MOOC on Learning Design Studio, and it was so impressive that when I spoke to him, I said, "No, Yeshe, we got to get you at Unisa because you just widen up the whole discourse." And it's so interesting that the way that it's flown. We started off with markers with technology and broadening our insights to technology, and then we jumped to Andrea with the idea of open pedagogy in the digital era, and now we come with Yeshe, which challenges us a bit more with his topic on hybrid education when learning defies boundaries and challenges conventions. And I think this is actually a good way for us to cap up what we've been talking about today. Let me read quickly a bit of Yeshe's bio before he takes over. So Dr. Yeshe Moore is interested in the design and use of technology for social and individual empowerment through opening opportunities for participatory learning, collective action, and expression. He was previously the head of the Center for Innovation and Excellence in Education at Levinsky College of Education Design Scientist at PAU Education, senior lecturer in education technology at the Institute for Education Technology. the Open University UK. Is also teaching fellow at Technology and Education graduate program in the Faculty of Education, University of Haifa. Senior Research Fellow, the London Knowledge Lab, Senior Software Engineering, Cisco Systems, and is currently the CTO of EXP Editions. Yashay, thank you very much, Yashay. Also, I know your schedule is very busy and it was really tough to get you here, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us, Yashay. So welcome, and I say welcome to Unisa's virtual platform, and let me hand over to you, Yashay. So thank you, Yashay, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Now let's see if I manage to navigate the technical aspects of this. Can you see my presentation?
Thanks, Yashay. It's clear.
Sorry, you can see my presentation now, yeah?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so one thing I haven't managed to figure out is how to see you alongside my presentation, but that's just because I have a PhD in educational technology, so I can't manage Microsoft Teams and Google Slides. In any case, if you want my slides, and you can pick up the link in the bottom of this one, and or the QR code. I'll also share them later in the chat. So I'm going to talk a bit about hybrid education. I just wanted to mention, well, first of all, thank you for that very generous introduction, and I think I have a serious challenge talking after Marcus and Andrea. I think they had two brilliant talks, and hopefully some of what I say would relate or resonate with those talks. Just thinking about Marcus's talk about mobile learning and seamless learning reminded me of one of my first encounters with mobile learning. Was actually a project from South Africa. I don't know how many of you are familiar, probably a few of you are familiar with the M4Lit project, which was then called YOSA. And this is, I think a kind of a groundbreaking project in mobile learning, but also in a way in hybrid education. And I might, if I have time, I'll refer to that later. So, but today, we're, like I said, we're talking about hybrid education, and this is just, I did quick Google on hybrid education in South Africa, and not surprising, just like in other places in the world, suddenly this a year ago when we did a workshop on hybrid education spaces, we were kind of on the eccentric, esoteric side of the scale, and now this has become the norm, right? Everybody suddenly discovered that effectively, if you have 500 or 5,000 students in a lecture hall, from the fifth line onwards, it's distance education, right? So they might as well stay at home, and so everybody's talking about hybridity and digital, and I think these things kind of came up in previous talks as well. But then we have the challenges, when we try to turn that into a reality. Well, it's all very nice if you have internet access at home, but we know that this is a challenge definitely in the African context, and not just in the African context. I have to say, we are, like everyone else here in Israel, experiencing the impact of COVID-19. And although you would expect a startup nation to have high penetration of internet access, but in fact we have some populations where still, like Bedouin in the Negev, they have to walk to the nearest hill where they can get mobile reception, and never, not to say anything about having actual internet access at home. Apart from that, when you suddenly send everybody is home, then you have 5 or maybe more people at home at the same time trying to access their studies or work, what have you. Even if the broadband is there, then you have just the amount of noise, and you're just finding you end up kind of locking yourself in the bathroom to do your Zoom talk. Luckily today I'm not in that situation. We're out of lockdown. But so again, this term hybrid, it kind of gets intermixed with, well, we talk about network, blended learning, HyFlex. I'm sure you've heard about HyFlex, connected learning, active learning, seamless learning. I think Marcus mentioned that. So let's try a quick poll, if you can, let's see if you can, do you know Slido? Just go to slido.com with any device and join at poll number 9407 and give me your definition of hybrid education. So I see somebody entered the poll, but instead of giving a definition of hybrid, actually typed in the number of the poll. Not sure if you can change your vote, but so far we're not seeing a lot of responses to that. So maybe instead of the poll, maybe we can simply use the chat. So maybe in the chat people can type what is their definition of hybrid education. Maybe somebody wants to blended learning. So yeah, so a lot of people identify hybrid with blended, integrating, using various tools for all stakeholders. That's bringing the stakeholder in sounds a good idea. All spaces, all times, all media is synonymous to blended learning, and that's one of the definitely a lot of people or a lot of institutions, a lot of places where you read about hybrid learning, they even say, well, hybrid or blended, it's the same thing. I'm going to argue that it's not really the same thing. So let me maybe continue with my presentation and try to explain why I think it's not the same thing. So if you look at the library definition, a hybrid is essentially, offspring of two different subspecies, right? Or a person whose background blends two diverse cultures or traditions, right? And one of the definitions of hybrid learning spaces are dynamic spaces created by the constant movement of users who carry portable devices connected to the internet and other users. So this definition puts its emphasis actually on the devices, right, on the technology, and kind of relates to what Marcus was talking about, mobile and seamless learning. Okay, but then you see that those devices create a dynamic space because the users are in movement, right, and they connect to the internet, to other users. So there's a connectivity, the movement which comes in here. This is Jesse Stonewall, who actually is the editor of Hybrid Education Journal. And he said, hybridity is not about the technology. It's about this sort of the phenomena that emerge when two things blend into each other and mix with each other. So it's not just about the mixing of different technologies, but about creating something new out of that mix and creating some when the technology enables us to kind of bring two different cultures into interplay with each other. If you have, even if we talk about the classroom culture and the home culture, the classroom situation and the work situation, and even in Andrea's talk on micro-credentials, it came in with this sort of kind of stress, but perhaps synergy between work and education. Right. Another definition, it says a context of learning that moves beyond distinction between the online and offline, but also challenging divisions between teacher-student roles, formal, informal, analog, digital, and other traditional separate dimensions. So what happens is that when you kind of fully acknowledge the impact of this mixing between different contexts, then something new happens. So the idea about the hybrid is it's not just having two separate media, one alongside the other, you know, having online and offline one alongside the other. And you say, okay, so, you know, we have a course where 1 week they come to campus and another week they do it online, or that some of the students are on campus and some are online. But actually, we're trying to think about blurring the boundaries between physical, virtual, formal, informal, also between human and artificial intelligence. And there are examples where we have automated tutors, or we use analytics to actually extend our human intelligence and bring something, a kind of a partnership between man and machine into the educational space. We have even breaking the boundaries between secondary and tertiary education, and MOOCs are a good example there, where MOOCs are essentially taking tradition of higher education, take content of higher education, making it available to people, and a lot of secondary students can then access higher education courses, participate in them, perhaps even start building towards a degree. We have also blurring the roles between teacher and student. So when we create a truly hybrid environment, then suddenly sometimes it's a student who teaches us as a teacher. They bring something that we don't have access to from their own context. So all these, you know, when we start crossing these boundaries and challenge them, we're creating disruptive educational experiences. So if I want to kind of distinguish between blended, high flex, and hybrid, by the way, just so if I quickly, no, I have a problem of switching between the chat and the presentation, but I don't know if, are you familiar with the term high flex? Just maybe a quick vote, or maybe someone can respond in the chat if you heard about the term high flex, because high flex is becoming quite popular definitely in Israel, but I think also in other places. The idea about high flex, so that's kind of a amalgamation of hybrid and flexible, is that you have a classroom which is equipped in such a way that some students can participate in that classroom from a distance. So that you say, okay, if you're able to come to the classroom, or then you come to the classroom. If not, you participate remotely. And that means that you need to, as a teacher, you need to take into account that some of the students will be present with you physically, some will be present remotely, and some will actually engage asynchronously, because they will engage online, but at a different time. The idea is to actually provide opportunities of access to education, no matter whether you can actually physically make it at the time and place of the lesson or not. But really, high flex is mainly about providing broader access. It does put some limitations and some guidelines on the nature of pedagogy, but it doesn't fundamentally change the pedagogy. Blended, it just means that you mix. You have a classroom, and in the classroom you also use technology, or you have a course that occurs partially online and partially face-to-face, but still the pedagogy doesn't change. When I talk about hybrid, I'm talking about synergizing the different contexts, so making use of the fact and referring to the fact that I'm in one place and you're in a totally different time and place. And perhaps making, referring to your context, both in the terms of the limitations and the restrictions it imposes, but also in terms of the opportunities that it offers. I'll give you one example, and this is again from that my colleague Rike Topp-Norgott from Aarhus at the workshop we had last year on hybrid learning spaces. He told us about a course. This is a master's in educational design that she ran as a hybrid course, and you can see that you had students in the class, but also students from home, students presenting from home, also people from outside of the course who engage with the course community through social media. You had even sometimes students would participate in a lesson while they were driving from one place to another. And at the end, they had the final, there was a sort of a project-based course. At the end, they presented the projects in a local library to open audience. So again, they brought in the experiences, the different experiences of students in the locations that they were, and drew on their experience, built a course curriculum around these experiences, around mixing these experiences. And in the end, well, not only in the end, because through social media, and then in the end through a public event, they share those experiences with a wider circle of participants. So you have this, again, the blurring of the boundaries, both in terms of the location, but also in terms of am I participating here as a student, as a teacher, or as somebody from the general audience that's interested in the topic. Okay, so hopefully I kind of got a sense of the ideas of hybrid education across, the idea that it's not just about intermixing technology, but it's about acknowledging the different contexts and the different spaces in which education occurs, and the interplay and discourse dialogue between those spaces. But that seems very abstract. So we need some sort of organizing structure in order to think about these things. We need some way of taking those abstract concepts and turning them into the reality. And here I want to rely on the work of Lee Schumann, who coined the term signature pedagogies. And he said, well, if you want to really understand a culture, or he attributed this actually to Erik Erikson, that if you want to understand a culture, study its nurseries. If you want to understand a profession, then look at the way this profession is taught. And he said every profession, every educational institution had its signature pedagogies. It's a sort of fundamental way in which teaching and learning is organized. The idea is that generally human activity is organized in the system of practice, and this system of practice consists of values, belief, norms, and then patterns of action. And likewise, when we talk about university teaching, then we have a system of practice, which we sort of take for granted. It's most of the time it's invisible for us, and that's why we don't really see where we want to change it, or where we want to challenge it, and where it's changing because of external circumstances. So a signature pedagogy, as Lee Schumann phrases it, consists of three levels. There's a surface structure, which is what we see in terms of the acts of teaching, such as me now standing here talking, you listening. That is a particular act of teaching, right? It's different from where if I was standing in front of you in a classroom or a lecture hall. Right now, I'm actually seeing the tree outside of the window rather than seeing you sitting in front of me. There's a deep structure, which is a set of assumptions about what is the right way or the effective way of conveying knowledge. An implicit structure, which is a kind of a set of values and beliefs, which is a strata for that deep structure. So if I try to see these, kind of phrase these things in a more sort of simple way, the surface structure is how we do things. The deep structure is what we're doing, and the implicit structure is the why. right? And that translates into, in terms of the how, those are the pedagogical practices. They reflect some pedagogical principles, which in turn reflect pedagogical values and beliefs. But these actually, the pedagogical practices we use are there to induce what I call epistemic practices. In other words, the practices of learning, right? Our role as educators is to enable and to promote learning, right? So when I teach something, it's because I assume that by the way I teach, I enable you to learn, right? And again, so the pedagogical practices are matched with epistemic practices. Pedagogical principles match with epistemic principles, i.e. what we think are the right ways to learn. And again, the why, the values and beliefs that are, the drivers of how I teach are also driven by the values and beliefs about what I think is worthwhile for you to learn. So these are in order to represent these, we use what I call values and vision and values as statements that capture the implicit structure, design principles that capture the deep structure, and design patterns to capture the surface structure. And so. Okay, again, I said, well, pretty much went through these. The vision statements give a sort of aspiration, how we want the world to be. The value are statements of norms and ethics. Design principles say, okay, this is the imperative proposition, say, this is what you should do, and the design patterns actually give a way of how to do these things. Where do we get the vision and values for hybrid education? And again, I want to pause here and see if I manage to get some conversation, whether in the chat or just if someone wants to open the microphone. So if you think about what I talked about, hybrid education, how can you relate this to sort of what you see as values of you as an educator or Unisa as an educational institution? Anybody wants to? It feels like I'm kind of absolutely totally lost, you guys. So anybody wants to ask a question or clarify anything so far?
The mics are open, colleagues, so you can unmute yourself and raise a question to Yishay.
Yes, good day. I wish you guys very well. I just want a bit of clarity on what high flex education is. I'm sorry if I had missed that. I just want to know what's the difference between high flex and as well as hybridized education. Thank you so much.
Yes, so I'll respond to that quickly. So and perhaps I'll add some links to HyFlex to the presentation later so that you can see it. Generally, the HyFlex model is kind of a fairly structured model of how to teach in a scenario where you have a classroom that some of the students come to the classroom and some of the students cannot. And when I say cannot, it could be either because they live too far from the class, or because, as we see today, due to COVID restrictions, they cannot arrive, or simply because of space limitations. You have a course of 500 students, but only 50 seats in the classroom. And so the solution there is a classroom that is equipped for synchronous broadcast from the classroom and synchronous interaction with students from outside of the classroom. So as a lecturer, I would be sitting standing before 50 students, holding a conversation with them, and simultaneously through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any other instrument, holding a conversation with students who are not present physically but present remotely. And the whole session would be recorded, and so other students can participate asynchronously. Now, the thing is that obviously if I teach in this situation, this high flex situation, that means that I need to change the ways in which I teach. So obviously, just like when you teach face-to-face or online, the practices of teaching change. When you switch to a sort of a high flex scenario, then again, you need to make sure that all the content that you present is accessible both in class and remotely, both synchronous and asynchronous, and also that the places where you enable participation you enable participation both in classroom and remotely, both synchronous and asynchronous. So that's a high flex model. Now, I made a distinction between blended, which for me means simply mixing together different technologies, but it's just at the level of it's mainly a technologically driven situation. High flex, which I just described, and hybrid for me means that I actually take advantage of the fact that and relate to the fact that we're coming from different contexts. So I know that I'm now in my house in Tel Aviv, and you might be in your house, and I think, okay, maybe you have something from your context that you can bring into the session. Maybe you have something that creates an opportunity or perhaps creates a barrier. But also I understand that we come from a slightly different culture. I need to respect that different culture and try to look for synergies between these cultures. Does that clarify?
Yes, that does. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So when I talk about the idea of hybridity as looking for synergies between different cultures, between different contexts, and I think in South Africa you have different culture, for instance, and context in terms of the metropolitan and the urban and the rural. Right? And if you have a course where you have participants which come from these different contexts, how does that affect your course? Anybody wants to anybody brave enough to try and offer me some insights from the hybridity that you encounter in your teaching?
Hello?
Yes, please.
Yes, yes. I am a teacher at Unisa as well in the Department of Educational Foundations. So the module that is that amongst the other modules that I'm teaching, there's this one, which is about the educator as a researcher and a teacher. So from what you have been saying is that in the context of Unisa, if we have to adopt this because COVID-19 is actually pushing us to go that direction, but it might be a very dicey situation for us because we do not have the profile of the demographics of the type of students that we are teaching. From traditionally, how we have been teaching, you would only be able to realize that, okay, I'm teaching this group of students who are from this context or that context. When the students send emails, and with the online exams which started last year, that's when we started to realize that we are really facing we are teaching a divided group of students, where some of them were saying, I could not upload my exam, or I could not even access my question paper because there was network problem in my area. I mean, the deep area whereby even for network, I have to go to the mountain, just for a cell phone network or something. So we were only able to detect from those kind of interactions or communication with the students that we really have to be conscious that when we teach or when we compile our exams, we have to take all these dynamics of students into consideration. So now that this is going to be the new normal, it would really be a very crucial factor for us as teachers at Unisa to have the demographics of the kind of students that we are teaching, so that when you plan your lesson, you must have those kind of demographics and context take them into context, into consideration.
Thank you so much. Sorry, can you say your name? I missed that.
Oh, my name is Zipporah.
Zikora. So thank you so much. That's such a wonderful example, because if you would ask me to design a course on the educator as a researcher, I would design it based on the implicit assumptions that I make about my context. I think, okay, a teacher in Tel Aviv, they have broadband at home, they have some technology in the classroom, they have a mobile phone, a smartphone that they can use for recording data or accessing the internet and so on. And I would then build a course and also I would make some assumptions about their prior experience, their prior education, the language, and I'm not talking about Hebrew or English or Arabic, but also, the linguistic structures that they're used to. But then you say, if I'm talking about a teacher who lives in the rural area where they have to walk half a day just to get mobile reception, then what does that mean for them to be a researcher in their own context, right? Even the practices of research for them as a teacher would be different. If they need to access literature, obviously for them to access, for me, when I want to look at, if I mention HighFlex, then some of you can simply, all of you obviously at the moment can open Google and immediately find, 7 things you need to know about HighFlex but if I'm talking about, again, a student who's in a remote rural area, even if they get the concept